What if the reason you feel like giving up isn't failure, but silence you don't understand yet? In this video, I'll take you into my real life in snowy Montana, where broken English, cultural confusion, and quiet moments slowly turned into love, family, and strength. This is not just a story. It's the moment everything changed when I almost walked away. The snow that changed me. That question didn't come to me in a classroom or from a motivational video. It came to me on a freezing morning in Montana, when the world outside my window looked like a blank page covered in white snow, and my mind felt exactly the same. Empty, quiet, and a little lost. You know that feeling when you try to learn something new like English, and suddenly your brain just stops cooperating? Words you learned yesterday disappear. Simple sentences feel heavy. And the more you try, the worse it gets. That was me. Not for one day. Not for 1 week. For months. I remember standing at a small bus stop, snow falling slowly, the kind of snow that doesn't rush, just quietly takes over everything. A man next to me said something simple. "Cold today, huh?" And I froze. Not because of the weather. Because my brain couldn't catch the sentence fast enough. I knew those words. I had studied them. But in that moment, they felt like strangers. So I smiled. That polite, universal smile that says, "I have no idea what you just said, but I hope you think I do." And that's when it hit me. Maybe you've done the same thing. Pretended to understand. Nodded at the wrong time. Laughed half a second too late. It's exhausting, right? Your brain is working overtime, but the result feels like nothing. Here's something interesting. Neuroscience actually explains this. When you're stressed or afraid of making mistakes, your brain activates the amygdala, the part responsible for fear. And guess what? It literally blocks your ability to process language smoothly. So it's not that you're bad at English. Your brain is just trying to protect you. Which is ironic, because it's doing a terrible job. Back then, I didn't know any of that. All I knew was this. I felt small. Smaller than the snowflakes falling around me. Smaller than the silence that followed every conversation I couldn't join. Montana was beautiful, yes. Endless white fields, quiet roads, a sky so wide it made you feel like a tiny in the universe. But beauty doesn't always mean comfort. Sometimes it just makes your loneliness look more dramatic. And I was lonely. Not because I didn't have people around me, but because I couldn't connect. There's a big difference. You can stand in a room full of kind, smiling people and still feel completely invisible if you don't understand their words. That's the part no one tells you about moving to the United States. It's not just about language. It's about identity. Who are you when you can't express your thoughts? When your personality gets reduced to yes, no, and sorry? I started to doubt everything. My decision to come here. My ability to learn. Even my future. And then one night I almost gave up. I was sitting alone, scrolling through videos in my native language, trying to escape that heavy feeling. You know the one. When quitting feels peaceful. Like maybe life would be easier if you just went back to what's familiar. My brain whispered, maybe this isn't for you. And honestly, it sounded very convincing. But here's the strange thing. The next morning I woke up and the snow was still there. Quiet. Patient. Not trying to prove anything. Not rushing to melt. Just existing, slowly covering the world in its own time. And for the first time, I noticed something different. Silence wasn't attacking me. It wasn't judging me for my broken English. It wasn't laughing when I made mistakes. It was just there.
Calm.
Steady. And I started to wonder, what if I don't need to fight this silence? What if I can learn from it? So that day, I made a very small decision. Not a big, dramatic promise. Just something simple. I would stop trying to speak perfectly. Instead, I would speak slowly. I would listen without panic. I would allow pauses, even if they felt awkward. Because maybe, just maybe, those pauses were not failures. Maybe they were space. Space for understanding. Space for connection. Space for something deeper than just words. Later that day, I went back to the same bus stop. Another person stood next to me. Another simple moment. Another chance to fail, or to try differently. He looked at the sky and said, "Beautiful snow, right?" This time I didn't rush. I didn't pretend. I took a breath. And I said slowly, "Yes, that's very beautiful." Was it perfect?
No.
Was it enough? Somehow yes. He smiled. A real smile. Not the polite one I used before. And in that tiny exchange, something shifted. Not my English. My confidence. Because I realized something powerful. Connection doesn't start with perfect grammar. It starts with courage in small, quiet moments. And that was the beginning. Not of perfect English. Not even of love yet. But of something much more important. I stopped running away from silence. And, without knowing it, that silence was about to change my entire life. Lost in silence, not in love. There's a strange kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working too hard, but from trying to understand everything and still missing half of it. If you've ever lived in a place where people speak faster than your thoughts can follow, you know exactly what I mean. It's like your brain is always half a second behind reality. And that half second, it slowly turns into distance. That was my life in Montana. People were kind. Really kind. They smiled, they held doors, they said, "How are you?" Like they actually meant it. But here's the problem no one warns you about in the United States. When someone asks, "How are you?" they don't always expect a real answer. And if you take too long to respond, the moment is already gone. So I learned to survive, not connect. I'm good. Thank you. You too.
Short.
Safe. Empty. At first, I thought this was progress. I could finally say something without freezing. But deep inside, I knew the truth. I wasn't communicating. I was hiding. And the more I hid behind simple phrases, the more invisible I felt. It's like being present in your own life, but only as a background character. Now, here's something interesting about the human brain. Psychologists call it cognitive overload. When you're processing a new language, your brain is using more energy than usual. That's why even small conversations can feel draining. Not emotionally, physically. That's also why, after a few hours outside, I would come home and feel completely exhausted, even if I barely spoke. It wasn't laziness. It was survival. But survival has a cost. You start avoiding situations. You choose silence not because you like it, but because it's easier. No risk.
No embarrassment. No awkward pauses.
And slowly, silence becomes your comfort zone. But here's the twist. Silence can protect you and isolate you at the same time. I remember one afternoon in a small grocery store. Nothing special. Just another ordinary day. I was standing in line, holding a few items, repeating sentences in my head like a robot preparing for a test. Hi, how are you? I'm good, thank you. Credit card. Simple, controlled, predictable. Then the cashier looked at me and said something I didn't expect. Did you find everything you were looking for? My brain went blank. Not because it was a difficult question, but because it wasn't part of my script. And that's the problem with real life. It doesn't follow your practice sentences. So I froze. Again. The line behind me grew longer. I could feel the pressure. That invisible weight on your chest when you know people are waiting and your brain is still searching for words that should have been easy. Finally, I said, "Yes, thank you." Was it the perfect answer? Not really. But in that moment, perfection wasn't the goal. Escaping the situation was. I walked out of the store, heart beating faster than it should. And I asked myself something uncomfortable. Why does something so small feel so big? The answer is simple, but not easy. Because it's not about the sentence. It's about what the sentence represents. Confidence, belonging, identity. When you can't express yourself, you don't just lose words. You lose a part of who you are. And that's where the real struggle begins. That night, I sat quietly, thinking about all the moments I avoided, all the conversations I didn't have, all the connections that never started because I was too afraid of sounding wrong. And I realized something that changed everything. Maybe I wasn't afraid of English. Maybe I was afraid of being seen imperfect, because in my mind, every mistake felt like a spotlight. Like people would notice, judge, remember. But the truth? Most people don't care as much as you think. They're busy with their own lives, their own thoughts, their own insecurities. Your mistake is just a tiny moment in their day. But in your mind, it becomes a story. And stories are powerful. They can trap you, or they can free you. So, I started asking a different question. Not, what if I make a mistake? But, what if I don't try at all? Which one is worse? Because staying silent might protect your pride, but it slowly steals your life. And here's where things get interesting. Right when I felt the most disconnected, something unexpected began to happen. Not in a big, dramatic way, but in small, quiet moments. A longer eye contact. A slower conversation. A person who didn't rush me. At the time, I didn't realize it. But I wasn't just lost in silence anymore. I was about to meet someone who understood it. Not the words. The silence itself. And somehow, that would become the beginning of everything I didn't know I was searching for. The day I met him, you'd think a life-changing moment would be loud. Something dramatic. Music playing. Snow falling in slow motion like a movie scene. Maybe you say something perfect, confident, unforgettable. That's what I used to imagine. But the day I met him was almost invisible. No music. No perfect words. Just a quiet afternoon in Montana where the snow had already settled and the world felt still. The kind of stillness that makes you hear your own thoughts a little too clearly. I was at a small local cafe. Nothing fancy. Wooden tables, warm lights, and the smell of coffee that somehow makes everything feel less lonely. I didn't go there to meet anyone. I went there because it was easier than staying in my room, staring at my phone, pretending I was okay. You know that feeling. You don't want to be alone, but you also don't have the energy to talk. So you sit somewhere in between. That was me. I ordered the same thing I always did. Something simple, something safe. I even rehearsed the sentence in my head before speaking, just like I had been doing for weeks. Hi, can I have a latte, please?
Slow.
Careful. Controlled. The barista smiled. I survived the interaction. Small victory. I sat down near the window, watching people walk by in heavy coats, their breath visible in the cold air. Everyone looked like they belonged. Everyone seemed natural. And then he walked in. At first, nothing special. Just another person escaping the cold. But there was something different about him. Not loud. Not attention-seeking. Just calm. He looked around, then chose the seat right across from mine. Not too close. Not too far. Just enough to exist in the same space. We didn't talk. Not immediately. And strangely, it didn't feel awkward. Most silences I experienced before felt heavy, like something was missing. Like I was supposed to fill it with words I didn't have. But this silence? It felt okay. A few minutes passed. He glanced at me, then at my notebook on the table. I had been writing simple English sentences, trying to practice. Probably making mistakes. Definitely overthinking every word. He pointed at the notebook and asked, "Studying?" One word.
Clear. Slow.
Easy. And for the first time, in a long time, I didn't panic. I nodded, then said, "Yes, English." Again, not perfect, but enough. He smiled. Not the polite kind. A real one. The kind that says, "I understand more than what you just said." And then something unexpected happened. He didn't switch to complicated sentences. He didn't speak faster. He adjusted to me. "Good," he said. "English is not easy." There was a pause. But not an uncomfortable one. A shared one. I laughed a little. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. And for once, I didn't feel embarrassed about it. We started talking. Slowly. Very slowly. Our conversation was simple. Almost childlike. Short sentences. Long pauses. Occasional misunderstandings. At one point, I said something completely wrong, and he just waited. Gave me time to correct myself. No pressure.
No judgment.
And here's the interesting part. According to communication psychology, connection isn't built through perfect language. It's built through attunement, the ability to adjust to another person's pace, emotion, and energy. That's exactly what he did. Without trying to impress me, without making me feel small, he met me where I was. And that changed everything. Because for the first time since I arrived in the United States, I felt seen. Not as the person who struggles with English, but as a person. We talked about simple things. Weather, coffee, where I came from. He spoke clearly, slowly, sometimes repeating words without making it obvious. And I found myself doing something I hadn't done in weeks. I relaxed. My brain stopped racing. My shoulders dropped. Even my breathing felt different. And when your body relaxes, your brain works better. That's not just a feeling, it's science. When stress decreases, your brain's language centers become more active. You process faster. You respond easier, which explains what happened next. I said a full sentence. Not perfect, not smooth, but real. I come here to practice and not feel alone. I didn't plan it. It just came out. He looked at me for a moment, then nodded, slowly. I get that, he said. 3 words. But somehow they meant more than a long conversation. Because in that moment I realized something important. Connection isn't about saying more. It's about feeling understood, even with less. We sat there longer than I expected. Time moved differently in that cafe. Or maybe for the first time, I wasn't measuring time by how uncomfortable I felt. When I finally stood up to leave, he said, "See you again?" A simple question, but it carried something deeper. Not pressure. Possibility. I hesitated for a second. Not because I didn't want to say yes, but because a part of me wasn't used to being invited into something real. Then I smiled and said, "Yes, see you." As I walked out into the cold Montana air, something inside me felt warmer. Not because I suddenly became confident. Not because my English improved overnight. But because I experienced something I didn't expect. Someone understood me without needing perfect words. And that's when a quiet thought appeared. What if love doesn't start with big conversations? What if it starts in the pauses?
I didn't know it yet.
But that quiet afternoon, that simple conversation, that shared silence, was the beginning of a story much deeper than language, and much harder to walk away from. Love without perfect English. Have you ever tried to explain your feelings and realized you don't even have the words in your own language, let alone English? Now, imagine trying to build a relationship like that. That was us. No deep vocabulary.
No poetic sentences.
No long emotional talks like in movies. If you listen to our conversations back then, you might think, that's it? That's all they say to each other? And honestly, yes, that was all we had. But somehow it was enough. After that day at the cafe, we started seeing each other more often. Not in a dramatic, we're dating now kind of way. More like 2 people who found comfort in the same quiet space. We would sit together, drink coffee, and talk in simple English. How was your day? Good, a little busy. Cold outside. Yes, very cold. Short sentences. Long pauses. And yet, those pauses didn't feel empty anymore. They felt full. Here's something most people misunderstand about communication. They think more words mean more connection. But psychology tells us something different. Real connection often happens in what's called emotional synchrony, when 2 people feel the same rhythm, even without saying much. That's what we had. We were slow together. And in a world that moves fast, that kind of slowness is rare. At first, I was still insecure. Every time I spoke, there was a voice in my head correcting me, judging me, reminding me of every mistake. You said that wrong. That grammar is not correct. You sound stupid. You know that voice, right? It's loud. But over time, something interesting happened. That voice started getting quieter. Not because my English became perfect, but because he never reacted to my mistakes. If I said something wrong, he didn't laugh. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct me in a way that made me feel small. Sometimes he would gently repeat my sentence, correctly but naturally, like part of the conversation. And that's a powerful technique, by the way. Language experts call it implicit correction. Instead of pointing out errors directly, you model the correct form. It helps the brain learn without triggering embarrassment. I didn't know the term back then. I just knew. I felt safe. And when you feel safe, you try more. I started using longer sentences, taking small risks, saying things I wasn't 100% sure about. Sometimes I made mistakes. Actually, many times. But something surprising happened. He understood me anyway. Not every word, but the meaning. And that's when I realized something that completely changed how I saw language. Language is not about perfection. It's about intention. If your intention is clear, people will meet you halfway. One evening, we were walking outside. Snow crunching under our feet. The air so cold it felt like it was touching your bones. I remember trying to say something more personal. Something real. My heart was beating faster than it should for such a simple moment. I said, slowly, I feel happy when I talk with you. Was it grammatically perfect?
No.
Did it sound like something from a textbook? Also no. But it was honest. And sometimes, honesty doesn't need perfect structure. He stopped walking for a second, looked at me, not surprised, not confused, just present. I feel the same, he said. Simple,
Clear. Real.
and just like that something shifted again. Not in the way movies show love. No dramatic music, no sudden realization. Just a quiet understanding. A shared feeling. And that's when I started to notice something fascinating. The less I tried to sound perfect, the more natural our connection became. Because perfection creates distance. But authenticity creates closeness. Think about it. When you talk to someone who sounds too perfect, too polished, too controlled, it can feel a bit distant, right? Like you're talking to a version of them, not the real person. But when someone pauses, searches for words, even makes small mistakes, it feels human. It feels real. That's what I became. Not perfect, just real. And that's what made the difference. Of course, not everything was easy. There were moments of confusion. Times when I misunderstood something important. Times when I couldn't explain what I truly felt. But instead of breaking the connection, those moments deepened it. Because we had to slow down. We had to listen more carefully. We had to be patient. And patience is something many relationships don't have enough of. In a strange way, my limited English became a strength. It forced us to communicate better. Not faster. Not more. Better. We paid attention to tone. To facial expressions. To silence. Yes, silence again. That thing I used to fear so much. Now it became part of our language. Sometimes we would sit together without saying anything for minutes. And instead of feeling awkward, it felt comfortable. Like we didn't need to prove anything. Like being there was already enough. And that's when a new question started forming in my mind. What if love doesn't grow through long conversations, but through the spaces between them? I didn't have the answer yet, but I was living it. And without realizing it, we were building something strong. Not with perfect English, but with patience, honesty, and a silence that was slowly turning into something much deeper. Everyday English, everyday love. Most people think learning English happens in a classroom. Textbooks. Grammar rules. Long lists of vocabulary you forget the next day. But let me tell you something that might sound a little strange. The most powerful English I ever learned didn't come from studying. It came from living. From small, ordinary, almost boring moments that didn't look important at all. Because real life doesn't give you perfect sentences. It gives you situations. And those situations, they force you to adapt. After we started spending more time together, our lessons didn't look like lessons. There was no whiteboard, no corrections in red ink, no pressure to be right, just daily life. We went grocery shopping together, and suddenly, English wasn't something abstract anymore. It became practical. What do we need? Milk, eggs, maybe bread? Which one is cheaper? Simple questions. Real answers. At first, I still translated everything in my head, word by word. Slow.
Exhausting.
Like trying to run while carrying a heavy backpack. But over time, something changed. I stopped translating. I started recognizing. There's a big difference. Your brain, when exposed to repeated patterns, begins to store phrases as chunks, not individual words. It's called chunking in language learning. And it's one of the fastest ways to sound natural. So instead of thinking, what plus do plus we plus need, my brain just recognized the whole phrase. What do we need? Automatic. Effortless. And guess what triggered that shift? Repetition in real context. Not memorizing. Experiencing. We cooked together. And cooking, surprisingly, became one of the best English classrooms I never signed up for. Cut this. Not too big. Careful, it's hot. Short instructions. Immediate feedback. If I misunderstood, the result was obvious. Burned food. Wrong ingredients. A small disaster. But we laughed. A lot. And laughter is important. Because when you laugh, your brain releases dopamine, a chemical that improves memory and learning. So those mistakes weren't failures. They were training. Fun, slightly chaotic training. Even watching TV became a lesson. At first, I used subtitles in my native language. Then English subtitles. Then, slowly, no subtitles at all. I didn't understand everything. Actually, I missed a lot. But instead of stopping, I learned to focus on what I did understand.
Tone.
Emotion.
Keywords.
And something interesting happened. I started guessing meaning correctly, not because I knew every word, but because I understood the situation. That's how children learn language, by the way. Not by memorizing grammar rules, but by observing patterns and context. And without realizing it, I was doing the same. But the most powerful moments? They weren't in the kitchen or in front of a TV. They were in conversations that didn't feel like practice but mattered more than anything. One night, we were sitting together, doing nothing special. No plan.
No topic.
Just quiet. Then he asked, "What do you miss most?" A simple question, but not an easy one. My first instinct was to give a short answer. Something safe. Something easy to say. But this time, I didn't want to stay on the surface.
So I tried. Slowly.
I miss my family. The feeling of understanding everything. Not thinking before speaking. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And something surprising happened again. He didn't rush to respond. He listened. Really listened. And then he said, "That must be hard." Not a long speech. Not a complicated reply. Just understanding. And in that moment, I realized something deeper. English was no longer just a skill I was trying to improve. It became a bridge. A bridge between my past and my present. Between who I was and who I was becoming. And that bridge didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be strong enough to carry meaning. Day by day, word by word, moment by moment, I was building that bridge. Not alone, but with someone who made the process feel human. Of course, there were still days when I felt tired. Days when my brain refused to cooperate. Days when even simple sentences felt heavy again. But those days didn't break me anymore. Because I had something I didn't have before. Context. Connection. Purpose. I wasn't learning English just to be better. I was learning it to live my life fully. To express love. To share thoughts. To build something real. And when your reason becomes emotional, not just logical, your progress changes. It becomes deeper, more consistent, more meaningful. So if you're struggling right now, if English feels slow, confusing, frustrating, maybe you're focusing on the wrong thing. Maybe it's not about learning more. Maybe it's about living more in the language. Because the truth is simple. You don't need perfect English to build a connection. You just need enough courage to use what you already have. And as our days became more natural, more connected, more real, I started to notice something else. Not about language, but about life in America itself. Because while I was learning how to speak, I was also learning how different this world really was. And not everything was as simple as it seemed. America is not what I thought. You know that moment when reality quietly replaces your expectations and you don't even notice it happening? That was my life in the United States. Before I came to Montana, I had this picture in my head. Maybe you have it too. America felt fast, exciting, full of opportunities where everything just works. People speak clearly. Life moves smoothly. And if you try hard enough, everything will fall into place. That picture? It wasn't completely wrong. But it wasn't complete either. Because what no one tells you is this. Life in America isn't hard because it's complicated. It's hard because it's different in ways you don't expect. Take something simple, time. In many places, time feels flexible. Conversations can stretch. Moments can breathe. But here, time feels structured. Precise. Almost invisible, but always present. If we meet at 3, it means 3. Not 3:05. Not whenever you arrive. Exactly 3. At first, that stressed me out more than English. Because now it wasn't just about understanding words. It was about understanding systems. Then there's something even more subtle, personal space. People here are friendly. They smile, they greet you, they say have a nice day to strangers. But at the same time, there's an invisible boundary. You don't stand too close. You don't ask too many personal questions too quickly. You don't assume closeness just because someone is kind. That confused me. Because in my mind, friendliness meant connection. But here, friendliness is often just respect. And that difference? It matters. I remember one moment that made this very clear. We were at a small gathering. A few of his friends. Everyone was relaxed, talking, laughing. I was trying to follow the conversation, catching maybe 60% of what was said. Not perfect, but better than before. Then someone asked me, "So, what do you think about living here?" Simple question, right? But my brain didn't just process the words. It processed the meaning behind the question. Was I supposed to be honest? Polite? Positive? Critical? In that split second, I realized something. Communication isn't just language. It's culture. So I answered carefully. I think it's different, but I learn a lot. Safe. Neutral. Everyone nodded. The conversation moved on. But inside I was still thinking. Because the truth was more complicated. There were things I loved. The quiet roads. The respect for rules. The feeling that if you work hard, you can build something real. But there were also things that felt distant. Neighbors who smile, but don't talk much. Schedules that leave little room for spontaneity. A system that works, but doesn't always feel warm. And here's the important part. That doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means it's different. And your brain? It doesn't like different. From a psychological perspective, humans are wired to seek familiarity. When everything around you changes, language, behavior, expectations, your brain goes into a low-level stress mode. Not panic, just constant adjustment. And that constant adjustment is tiring. That's why some days, I didn't feel like talking at all. Not because I didn't want to connect, but because I was already processing too much. And then something else happened. Something small, but powerful. I started noticing the things I used to ignore. Like how people say, "Excuse me," even for the smallest movement. How they respect lines. Wait their turn. How strangers help you without expecting anything back. Simple things, but meaningful. And slowly, my perspective began to shift. Instead of asking, "Why is it like this?" I started asking, "What can I learn from this?" Because every culture has its logic, its rhythm, its unspoken rules. And once you start seeing those patterns, things feel less confusing, more predictable, more manageable. But here's where it connects to everything else. Language learning, relationships, even love. Because when you understand culture, you understand context. And when you understand context, communication becomes easier. Not perfect, but clearer. I remember one evening, walking with him again. Snow still covering the ground, the air quiet like always. I told him slowly, "I think I understand more now. Not just English, but people." He smiled. "That's more important," he said. And he was right. Because you can know every grammar rule and still feel disconnected. But if you understand how people think, how they behave, how they express themselves, even simple English becomes powerful. And in that moment, I realized something deeper. Maybe I didn't come to America just to learn a language. Maybe I came here to change how I see the world. And that change? It was preparing me for something I didn't expect. Because even when you start understanding more, misunderstandings can still happen. Especially when feelings get involved. And the next challenge? It wasn't about culture anymore. It was about something much more personal. What happens when the person who understands you the most suddenly doesn't understand you at all? The first fight in English. You'd think the hardest sentence in a relationship is, "I love you." It's not. The hardest sentence is the one you say when you're hurt. Because love can survive broken grammar. But misunderstandings? They grow quietly, and then all at once. Our first real fight didn't begin with something dramatic.
No betrayal. No shocking moment.
Just something small, the kind of thing most couples fix in 2 minutes if they have the right words. We didn't. It was one of those Montana afternoons where the sky looks calm, but the air feels sharp. We had planned to meet at the cafe, the same place where everything started. 3 o'clock. Clear. Simple. Agreed. But that day I was late. Not by much. 10 minutes, maybe a little more. In many places, that's nothing. But in the United States, time isn't just time. It's a signal. It means respect. It means reliability. It means you matter enough for me to be on time. I didn't fully understand that yet. When I walked in, I saw him sitting there. Still. Quiet. Not checking his phone. Not looking around. Just waiting. I smiled, trying to keep things light.
Sorry.
I'm a little late. He looked at me and said, You said 3. That's it. For words. But somehow they landed heavy. Now here's where things start to split. In my mind, I was thinking it's okay. It's only 10 minutes. But in his mind, he was thinking, if it matters, you show up on time. Same situation. Different meanings. This is something psychologists call interpretation gap. It's not about what happened. It's about what each person believes the event means. And meaning is where conflict lives. So I responded the way I thought made sense. It's okay, just 10 minutes. I even smiled a little, hoping to soften it. But the moment I said it, I could feel something change. Because what I meant was, don't worry, it's small. But what he heard was, your feelings about this are not important. And that's the danger of simple English. It can carry complex emotions, but without enough clarity to protect them. He leaned back slightly, not aggressive, just distant. It matters to me, he said.
Slow.
Controlled. But now there was weight behind every word. My brain started working fast. Not just to translate, but to understand. And when you're doing both at the same time, something always gets lost. Was he angry? Was I wrong? Was I overthinking? I didn't know. So I tried to fix it. I was busy. I try come fast. The sentence wasn't complete. The grammar wasn't right. But I hoped the meaning would reach him. It didn't fully. Because this wasn't about information. It was about emotion. And emotion needs space, tone, nuance, things that are hard to express when you're still building your language. He nodded slightly, but his face didn't change. And that's when something uncomfortable started to grow. Not anger, frustration, the quiet kind. The kind that builds when two people are trying but missing each other. I felt it too. Because in my mind I was trying. I showed up. I spoke. I explained. I didn't run away. But it still felt like I was failing. And then something very human happened. I stopped talking. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't know how to say it right. Silence filled the space between us. But this silence wasn't like before. Before, silence felt warm, safe, shared.
Now,
it felt cold,
heavy.
like something was breaking quietly. He looked at me, waiting. I looked at the table. Because when your brain feels overwhelmed, it looks for escape. And eye contact suddenly feels too intense. There's a concept in psychology called emotional flooding. When your brain gets overwhelmed by stress, it reduces your ability to think clearly, speak clearly, even listen properly. That's exactly what was happening. Not just to me, to both of us. After a long moment, he spoke again. I'm not upset about 10 minutes.
Pause.
I'm upset because it feels like it doesn't matter to you. And just like that, everything became clear. Not the grammar. Not the vocabulary, the meaning.
He wasn't talking about time.
He was talking about importance, about feeling valued. And suddenly, I realized something painful. I hadn't failed to speak English. I had failed to communicate what I felt. And those are not the same thing. So, I did something different. Instead of trying to be correct, I tried to be honest. I took a breath, slower than usual, and said, "It matters. I just don't know how to say right." The sentence was broken, but the feeling wasn't. And something shifted. Not instantly, but noticeably. Because honesty has a way of cutting through confusion, even when the words are imperfect. He looked at me again. This time, not with distance, but with understanding. Not full understanding, but enough. And sometimes enough is what saves you. We didn't suddenly fix everything. There was no perfect resolution. No movie-style ending where everything becomes clear and easy. But we stayed. We listened. We tried again. And that matters more than perfect communication. As we sat there, the tension slowly softened. Not gone, just lighter. And I realized something important in that moment. In your native language, you argue with words. In a new language, you argue with patience. Because you don't have the luxury of saying everything you feel. You have to choose what matters most. You have to slow down. You have to listen harder. And maybe that's not a weakness. Maybe that's a different kind of strength. When we left the cafe, the snow had started falling again. Quiet, steady, like it always does in Montana.
We walked side by side,
not talking much. But this silence, it wasn't empty. It was processing, healing, learning. And I kept thinking about one simple truth. Maybe misunderstandings aren't signs that something is wrong. Maybe they're signs that something is real enough to need effort. Because easy communication doesn't build deep connection. Working through confusion does. That night didn't break us. It revealed us. Two people still learning, not just the language, but each other. And somehow, that uncomfortable, imperfect, quiet fight became the reason we started understanding more deeply than before. Silence builds deeper connection. What if the thing you've been trying to avoid is actually the thing that can bring you closer? Not more words. Not better grammar. Silence. That sounds a little uncomfortable, right? Because most of us are taught the same idea. If something is wrong, talk it out. If you care, say more. If you love someone, explain everything clearly. And yes, that's true, to a point. But what no one tells you is this. Too many words at the wrong time can create more distance than silence ever could. After our first fight, something changed between us. Not in a dramatic way. No big decision. No we need to talk moment. Just a quiet shift. We spoke less. And strangely, that didn't feel like a loss. It felt like space. You see, before that moment, I thought silence meant failure. It meant I didn't know enough English. It meant I couldn't express myself. It meant something was missing. But now, silence felt different. It felt like something we were sharing. There's a concept in psychology called comfortable silence. It's when two people can be together without needing to fill the space with words, and instead of feeling awkward, it feels safe. That's rare. And it doesn't happen at the beginning of a relationship. It happens when there's trust. We didn't talk about that night right away. We didn't analyze every sentence or try to fix everything immediately. Instead, we did something much simpler. We stayed. The next day, we met again. Same cafe. Same window. Same snow falling outside like the world was moving in slow motion. At first, we just sat there. No rush to speak. No pressure to explain. Just presence. And here's what I noticed. My body wasn't tense anymore. My mind wasn't racing to prepare sentences. I wasn't trying to be correct. I was just there. And that changed everything. Because when your body feels safe, your brain opens up. Not just for language, for connection. He looked at me and asked, "Coffee?" I nodded. Yes. That was it. No long conversation. But somehow, that small exchange felt more meaningful than many full conversations we had before.
Why?
Because it didn't carry pressure. It carried understanding. We started building a new rhythm, not based on talking more, but based on feeling more. Sometimes we would sit for 10, maybe 15 minutes without saying anything, just watching the snow, listening to the quiet sounds of the cafe. And instead of feeling like something was missing, it felt complete. That's when I realized something surprising. Silence isn't empty. It's full of information, body language, eye contact, breathing, energy. Your brain reads all of it. In fact, research shows that more than 60% of communication is nonverbal, which means even if your English isn't perfect, you're still communicating a lot. And maybe that's why our connection started to feel deeper. Because we weren't relying only on words anymore. We were paying attention to everything else. One afternoon, we took a walk. The snow was softer that day, less sharp, more like a quiet blanket covering the ground. Our footsteps made a slow, rhythmic sound. Crunch.
Pause.
Crunch.
No conversation.
Just movement. At one point, I looked at him and said, "We don't talk much." He smiled slightly. "But we understand," he replied. And that sentence stayed with me.
Because it changed how I saw everything.
Before, I thought understanding came after communication. Now I realized sometimes understanding comes before words. Sometimes words are just confirmation. And when you think about it, that makes sense. Have you ever been with someone where you had to explain everything all the time just to feel understood?
Exhausting, right?
But when you're with someone who already feels your mood, your energy, your silence, you don't need to say as much. And that's not a weakness. That's connection. Of course, this doesn't mean we avoided talking forever. Silence isn't about hiding. It's about choosing the right moment to speak. And when we did speak again, really speak, it felt different. Slower. More intentional. More honest. Because we weren't trying to win an argument anymore. We were trying to understand each other. There's another interesting concept in psychology called processing time. When you pause before responding, your brain has more time to organize thoughts, regulate emotions, and choose better words. In a second language, this becomes even more important, because without pauses, everything becomes reactive. But with pauses, you create clarity, and clarity builds trust. One evening, after a long quiet day together, I said something I had been thinking about for a while. I think silence helps me feel less afraid. It wasn't a perfect sentence, but it was true. Because before, silence made me feel exposed, like I had nothing to offer. Now it made me feel calm, like I didn't need to prove anything. He nodded. Silence can be strong, he said. Not loud, not emotional, just certain. And in that moment, I realized something deeper. Maybe silence isn't the absence of connection. Maybe it's the foundation of it. Because when two people can sit together, without words, without pressure, without fear, and still feel close, that's not emptiness. That's trust. And trust is what turns a simple connection into something lasting. Looking back, it's almost ironic. The thing I feared the most, silence, became the thing that brought us closer. Not because we avoided speaking, but because we learned how to exist without needing to fill every space. And in that space, something quietly grew. Not just comfort, not just understanding, something deeper, something that didn't depend on perfect English, something that didn't break under pressure, something that could survive even when words failed. And that's when I started to see it clearly. This wasn't just about language anymore. It was about building a life together, in a place that still felt new, in a culture I was still learning, in a relationship that was slowly becoming real. But real life? It doesn't stay calm forever. Because when things get deeper, they also get more complicated. And the next step wasn't just about connection. It was about commitment, about building something bigger than just two people sitting in silence. It was about creating a life in a place that would test us in ways we didn't expect. Marriage, family, and real life. Nobody really tells you when a relationship stops feeling like a story and starts feeling like real life. There's no clear moment.
No announcement.
No music in the background. It just happens. One day, you're sitting in a quiet cafe, learning how to say simple sentences. And the next, you're standing in a kitchen, arguing about groceries, bills, schedules, and realizing this is no longer just connection. This is commitment. After everything we had been through, the silence, the slow conversations, the misunderstandings that didn't break us, we made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not even a perfectly planned one. Just a quiet, mutual understanding. We were building something together. And in the United States, building a life isn't just emotional. It's practical. Very practical. You start thinking about things you never thought about before.
Rent.
Insurance. Work schedules. Taxes. Healthcare. And suddenly, your relationship isn't just about how you feel. It's about how you function together. That was a whole new challenge. Because love is simple when it's just two people sharing moments. But life asks harder questions. Can you solve problems together? Can you handle stress without turning against each other? Can you stay patient when things don't go as planned? And here's the part that hit me the hardest. All of that was happening in English. Not my native language. Not the language where I could express every thought clearly, every emotion fully. So every serious conversation felt heavier. Imagine trying to discuss money, responsibilities, future plans, while your brain is still translating basic sentences. That's not just communication. That's mental weight. I remember one evening, we were sitting at the table, looking at a list of expenses. Numbers don't need translation. But decisions do. We need to save more, he said. Simple sentence. Clear meaning. But when I tried to respond, my brain hesitated. Not because I didn't understand, but because I wanted to say something more complex. Something like, I agree, but I also feel overwhelmed and I'm still adjusting and I'm trying my best. But what came out was, yes, I try. 2 words. And somehow they didn't feel enough. That's when frustration can grow again. Because inside, your thoughts are rich, detailed, emotional. But outside, they sound small. And if you're not careful, you start believing that you are small. But here's the truth. You are not your vocabulary. You are not your grammar. You are not limited by the number of words you know. You are only limited if you stop trying to express what matters. So, I started doing something different. Instead of trying to say everything perfectly in one sentence, I broke it down. I feel a little stress.
Pause.
But I want we do better. Not smooth, not advanced, but real. And slowly, that became enough. Because in real life, people don't need perfect speeches. They need honest effort. And here's something important about life in America. It values independence, but it also values responsibility. You can build your own life, but you're expected to manage it. There's less emotional support from the outside, less family involvement, more personal accountability. At first, that felt lonely, because I came from a place where family is always close, where support is natural, where you don't have to explain everything. You're just understood. But here, you build your own support system. And for me, that system became him. And eventually, our family. Yes, life moved forward. Not perfectly. Not without challenges. But steadily. We got married. Not in a big, dramatic ceremony. Just something simple. Like everything else in our story.
Real.
Quiet. Meaningful. And then came another transformation. Children. And if you think learning English as an adult is hard, try raising children in a language that is still new to you. Suddenly, you're not just learning for yourself. You're responsible for another human being. Doctor appointments, school communication, daily conversations. And kids, they learn fast. Faster than you. They absorb language like it's part of the air. And sometimes they speak better than you. That can feel strange, even intimidating. But it also becomes motivation. Because now, it's not about your confidence anymore. It's about their future. I remember one moment clearly. My child asked me a question in English. A simple question. And for a second, I didn't understand. That old feeling came back. The hesitation. The gap. But this time, I didn't panic. I smiled and said, "Can you say again slowly?" And they did. And I understood. And we continued.
No embarrassment.
No fear. Just learning. Together. And that's when I realized something powerful. Life doesn't wait for you to become perfect. It moves. And you grow inside it. Not before it. Inside it. Marriage, family, responsibility. They don't require perfect language. They require patience, consistency, and the willingness to keep showing up, even when it's hard. Looking back, I can see it clearly now. Every small conversation, every mistake, every moment of silence. They were all preparing me for this. Not just to speak English, but to live in English, to love, to argue, to build, to raise a family. And somehow, through all of that, something unexpected happened. English was no longer something I was chasing. It became something I was using. Naturally.
Daily.
Without fear. And that changed everything. Because when a language becomes part of your life, it stops being a barrier and starts becoming a tool, a bridge, a strength. And as our life in Montana continued to grow through snow, silence, and everything in between, I started to see something I never expected. The thing that once made me feel weak was becoming the thing that made me strong. English became my strength. There's a moment in every long journey where you stop asking, why is this so hard? And start realizing, wait, I'm not the same person anymore. It doesn't happen all at once. No big announcement. No dramatic turning point. Just small signs. Quiet changes. Almost invisible unless you look closely. For me, that moment didn't come in a classroom, or after passing a test, or after memorizing a list of advanced vocabulary. It came on a very normal day. The kind of day you would forget if it didn't change everything. I was at a parent-teacher meeting. Nothing unusual. Just another responsibility that came with building a family in the United States. But if you had told the version of me from a year before that I would be sitting in a room, listening to a teacher speak English about my child and actually understanding most of it, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then, even ordering coffee felt like a challenge.
Now,
I was discussing behavior, learning progress, future plans. Not perfectly, but confidently. And that's the difference. Confidence doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing you can handle what you don't know. The teacher was speaking at a natural speed. Not slow. Not simplified. Real English. There were still words I didn't catch. Phrases I had never heard before. But instead of freezing, I adapted. I listened for keywords. I watched facial expressions. I connected ideas. All the things I had practiced without realizing it. And when it was my turn to speak, I didn't wait for the perfect sentence. I spoke. I think my child is improving, but sometimes shy. Simple.
clear, real.
And it worked. The conversation continued. Naturally.
No panique.
No mental shutdown. Just flow. That's when it hit me. English was no longer something I had to fight. It became something I could use. And that shift, it changes everything. Because when a language becomes a tool, not an obstacle, your life expands. You stop avoiding situations. You start entering them. You stop staying quiet. You start participating. And participation is where growth lives. Looking back, I can see how it happened. Not through one big effort, but through hundreds of small ones. Every grocery store conversation. Every mistake in the kitchen. Every quiet moment at the cafe. Every misunderstanding that didn't break us. They were all training. Not just for my brain. For my identity. Because language isn't just about communication. It's about who you are when you speak. At the beginning, I felt like a smaller version of myself in English. Limited. Careful. Almost invisible. But over time, that version grew. Not by becoming perfect, but by becoming comfortable. And comfort creates freedom. I started noticing it in everyday situations. Talking to neighbors. Calling for appointments. Asking questions without rehearsing them 10 times in my head. Even joking a little. Yes, joking. Not perfectly, but enough to share a laugh. And laughter? That's a sign you've crossed an invisible line. From survival to living. There's a concept in psychology called self-efficacy. It's your belief in your ability to handle challenges. And here's the interesting part. Self-efficacy doesn't come from success alone. It comes from overcoming difficulty, which means every time you struggle and continue anyway, you're building something stronger than skill. You're building belief. And belief is what carries you forward when things get hard again. Because they will. Life doesn't suddenly become easy just because your English improves. You still face challenges, stress, unexpected problems, moments where you don't know what to say.
But now,
those moments don't stop you. They slow you down, but they don't define you. I remember one evening, sitting at home after a long day. Everything was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to feel heavy but now felt peaceful. I thought about the past. The bus stop. The cafe. The first conversation. The first fight. All the moments where I felt lost. And I asked myself something simple. What changed? Was it my vocabulary? A little. My grammar?
somewhat.
But that wasn't the real answer. The real change was this. I stopped trying to be perfect and started being present, because perfection creates pressure. But presence creates connection, and connection is what language is for. I looked at my life, my family, my conversations, my daily routines, and realized something that would have sounded impossible before. English didn't just help me survive in America. It helped me build a life here. A real one. With meaning. With relationships. With growth. And maybe the most surprising part? I no longer felt like an outsider trying to fit in. I felt like someone who belongs in their own way. Not because I speak perfectly, but because I show up consistently. And that's enough. More than enough. So if you're at the beginning of this journey, feeling frustrated, stuck, maybe even ready to give up, remember this. Your goal is not to become perfect. Your goal is to become capable. Capable of expressing. Capable of connecting. Capable of continuing, even when it's uncomfortable. Because one day, without realizing it, you'll look back and see it. The small moments. The quiet progress. The strength you didn't notice while it was growing. And you'll understand something deeply. The thing that once made you feel weak was actually training you to become strong. And as that strength becomes part of who you are, you start seeing your past differently. Not as failure, but as the beginning of everything. From giving up to growing up. If you could go back and meet the version of yourself who almost gave up, what would you say? Would you give advice? Encourage them? Tell them everything will be okay? Or would you just sit next to them quietly and let them feel understood? I think about that version of me a lot. The one standing at the bus stop, smiling politely without understanding a single sentence. The one sitting alone at night, scrolling through familiar words just to escape the pressure of a language that felt too big. The one who believed that maybe this wasn't for them. That version of me wasn't weak, just tired. And there's a difference. Because when you're tired, everything feels heavier than it actually is. Every mistake feels like proof that you're not good enough. Every silence feels like failure. Every small difficulty starts to look like a reason to stop. But here's the truth I didn't understand back then. You don't grow when things are easy. You grow when things are confusing, and you stay anyway. Looking back now, I can see the pattern. Not a straight line. Not a perfect journey. But a series of small, imperfect steps that somehow led me here. And the funny thing? At the time, none of those steps felt important. They felt too small, too slow, too insignificant to matter. But they did. Because progress doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes it feels like repetition. Like doing the same thing again and again without seeing immediate results. But your brain is changing. Quietly. In the background. Every time you listen, even if you don't understand everything. Every time you speak, even if the sentence isn't perfect. Every time you try instead of avoiding, you are building something. Not just skill. Resilience. There's a concept in neuroscience called neuroplasticity. It means your brain can physically change and adapt based on experience. But here's the important part. It doesn't change from one big effort. It changes from consistent, repeated actions. Even when those actions feel small. Even when they feel uncomfortable. So all those moments when I felt like I wasn't improving, I was. I just couldn't see it yet. And that's the hardest part of any journey. Continuing without visible proof. But something else changed too. Not just how I used English, but how I saw myself. At the beginning, I measured my worth by my ability to speak correctly. If I made mistakes, I felt embarrassed. If I didn't understand, I felt behind. If I stayed silent, I felt invisible. But over time, that perspective shifted. I stopped asking, "Do I sound perfect?" and started asking, "Am I expressing something real?" Because real communication isn't about perfection. It's about connection. And connection doesn't require flawless language. It requires honesty. I remember one moment that made this very clear. We were sitting together at home. Nothing special. Just a normal evening. And I started talking about my past. Not in a simple way. In a deeper way. About my fears, my doubts, the times I wanted to give up. My sentences were still not perfect. I paused. I searched for words. Sometimes I repeated myself. But I didn't stop. And he listened. Not correcting. Not interrupting. Just listening. And when I finished, he said something simple. "You've changed a lot. Not your English is better. Not you speak more fluently. But you've changed." And that's when I realized something important. This journey wasn't just about language. It was about growth. Real, personal growth. The kind that changes how you think, how you react, how you handle challenges. Because learning a language forces you to face discomfort. Every day. You can't hide from it. You either avoid it or you walk through it. And every time you choose to walk through it, you become a little stronger. A little more confident. A little more capable. That's why people who learn to live in a second language often change in deeper ways. They become more patient. More adaptable. More aware, because they've experienced what it feels like to not understand everything, and still continue. I started noticing this in myself. Situations that used to make me anxious didn't affect me the same way. I didn't panic when I didn't understand something. I didn't freeze when I had to speak. I didn't avoid conversations anymore. Not because everything became easy, but because I trusted myself to figure it out. And that trust, That's powerful. Because once you trust yourself, you don't need perfect conditions. You don't need everything to be clear. You don't need to control every situation. You just need to show up. And that's what I started doing. Again and again. Showing up. In conversations. In challenges. In life. And slowly, that became my new identity. Not someone who is learning English, but someone who is living fully, even while learning. Looking back now, I don't see failure. I see transformation. The best stop wasn't a moment of weakness. It was the beginning. The silence wasn't a problem. It was preparation. The mistakes weren't embarrassing. They were necessary. Everything I once wanted to avoid became part of the reason I grew. And maybe that's the lesson. The thing you're trying to escape might be the exact thing you need. So if you're feeling stuck right now, if you feel like you're not improving fast enough, if you're thinking about giving up, ask yourself one
question.
Not, am I good enough? But am I still trying? Because if the answer is yes, you're already on the right path. You just haven't reached the part where it all makes sense yet. And when you do, you won't just see how far you've come. You'll understand why it was worth it. Our love in the snow still grows. What if the life you almost gave up on is the one that quietly becomes everything you needed? Not perfect. Not easy, but real. If you walked into our life now, you probably wouldn't notice anything extraordinary at first. A house in Montana. Snow outside like always. Shoes by the door. Warm light in the kitchen. A table with small, everyday things, cups, notebooks. A child's drawing left slightly off-center, like it was placed in a hurry. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that looks like a story. But that's the thing about real stories. They don't look special from the outside. They feel special from within. Mornings are slow. Someone makes coffee. Someone forgets where they put their phone. A child asks a question before anyone is fully awake. Can we go outside today? Simple English.
Clear.
Natural. And I answer without thinking too much. Yes, after breakfast.
No translation. No hesitation.
Just life happening. And sometimes I pause. Not because I don't understand, but because I remember. The version of me who would have needed 10 seconds to process that question. The version of me who would have been afraid to answer. The version of me who almost walked away. That version still exists in my memory, but it doesn't control me anymore. Because somewhere between the silence, the mistakes, the slow conversations, and the quiet moments of connection, I changed, not into someone perfect, but into someone present. And that changed everything. Our relationship didn't become perfect either. We still have misunderstandings. We still have days where communication feels harder than it should. We still pause, search for words, sometimes say things the wrong way. But now we understand something we didn't understand before. It's not about avoiding problems. It's about how you move through them. Together. There's a kind of strength that doesn't come from always getting things right. It comes from staying, even when things feel uncertain. From listening, even when it's easier to react. From choosing connection, even when it takes effort. And that strength?
It was built slowly.
In silence. In snow. In moments that didn't look important at the time. I remember one evening recently. We were sitting by the window, watching the snow fall again. It looked almost the same as the first winter I arrived.
Quiet.
Endless.
Calm.
But everything felt different. Not the environment.
Me.
I turned and said something without preparing, without thinking too much about grammar or structure. I think this place changed me. He smiled. No, he said. You changed in this place. And that small correction? It meant everything. Because it reminded me of something simple, but powerful. The environment doesn't do the work for you. You do. The place gives you challenges. But you decide how to respond. And I responded. Not perfectly, but consistently. And that consistency built a life. A real one. With love that didn't depend on perfect words. With communication that didn't break when things got difficult. With a family that grew, not because everything was easy, but because we stayed through what was hard. There's something else I want you to understand. Especially if you're watching this and thinking, maybe I'm not good enough yet. You don't need to be ready. You don't need to feel confident all the time. You don't need perfect English, perfect timing, or perfect conditions. Because life doesn't wait for perfect. It moves. And if you keep showing up, you move with it. That's what this journey taught me. Not just how to speak, but how to continue. Even when I felt lost. Even when I didn't understand everything. Even when I wanted to stop. Because the truth is, the most important parts of your life will not happen when you feel fully prepared. They will happen when you decide to stay anyway, to try again, to speak, even if your voice isn't perfect, to listen, even when it's hard, to trust that something is growing, even if you can't see it yet. And maybe one day you'll look around your life, your conversations, your relationships, your quiet moments, and realize something surprising. You're no longer the person who was afraid. You're the person who continued. And that makes all the difference. Our love story didn't start with perfect English. It didn't grow because we said everything right. It grew because we didn't leave when things were unclear. Because we allowed silence to exist without letting it separate us. Because we turned small, imperfect moments into something meaningful. And that's why, even now when the snow falls in Montana, it doesn't feel cold. It feels like a reminder of where it started, of how far we've come, and of something simple but true. Love doesn't need perfect words to grow. It just needs two people willing to stay. Before you leave this video, let me ask you something real. What if the life you want isn't waiting for perfect English, but for the moment you decide not to quit? If you've ever felt stuck, silent, or invisible while learning English, this story was for you. Because fluency isn't built in comfort. It's built in small, honest moments where you keep going anyway. And maybe your story is just getting started. So, if this video made you feel understood, even a little, don't stop here. Subscribe to this channel for more real English story practice, where you don't just learn English, you live it, feel it, and grow through it. Because your voice matters, even before it's perfect. And your story? It deserves to be heard.